Hi guys, it's Sophie and welcome to the second half of my August wrap up. So as I said in my first half of the wrap up, I decided I'm going to start splitting them at the end of the month. It just works for me that way. So these are the last 7, I think, books that I've read in the month of August. So the first one I'm going to just quickly mention is Water for Elephants by Sara Gruen. I've done an entire review video on this one, so the link will be somewhere. I've figured cards out, so feel free to watch that one if you're interested in my thoughts. And I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. This one was very kindly gifted to me by Carousel Reading. She did a giveaway of some books that she didn't want anymore and I managed to get this one, and I'm really glad I did. This book is about a young woman who has sort of supernatural powers. It's kind of hard to explain, the entire book is kind of hard to explain, but for me it made complete sense when I read it. Essentially, spirits and sort of ghosts are something that are very accepted in this society. They just are a factor of life for the majority of the people in this world. However, the government doesn't think that spiritual warfare and spirits should be allowed to exist, and they try to sort of subjugate those who have the ability to communicate or interact with these spirits. And this is at the very beginning of the novel, so you end up with these crime syndicates who are using the spirits in ways that would benefit them, and you have the government who are trying to sort of quell the existence of these people. And we follow a main character who is in one of these criminal syndicates on her sort of journey through London, in this very odd different version of London, and it gets even more complicated than that, but I promise you if you read it, it just makes sense. It was the first YA I'd read for a while, and I did miss YA, and I have maybe bought some YA to sort of solve my cravings. I did like this one, and I don't think it's overly complicated, but I can see why it might seem that way. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It didn't quite hit that 5 out of 5 stars for me, but I will pick up the Mime Order, which is the second one of the series. And the next one I read was Reason She Goes to the Woods by Deborah K. Davies. This is worse to me in disturbing quality than Lolita is, which is one I'm going to talk about in a moment. This is a book about a little girl who is in no way normal. She is essentially psychopathic, I'm pretty sure that's what she is, but she's a child, and it's very hard to determine whether or not this is someone who is a truly bad person or whether there's someone who is a child who doesn't quite know what good is yet. It's told in very short sort of vignettes of her life, and by very short I quite literally mean it's one page little fragments. It's almost like short stories. It was incredibly compelling. I read it almost in one sitting, and it genuinely made me feel a bit ugh, which very rarely happens with books. As you know, I read a fair amount of darker books, and not a lot makes me feel ugh anymore, and this did. So if you like books that make you feel odd, then I would actually really recommend this one. I know that I will reread this to determine what that feeling was. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. And as promised, we have Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This was an odd one for me. I think that the writing is absolutely gorgeous, and I think that the story is very engaging, and I also think that it's something that most people would have no interest in ever knowing exists. It's a very hard thing. It's definitely one of those books for me that makes me question what the author thinks about the subject they're writing about. If you don't know about Lolita, it is essentially about a young girl, a child, who sort of going through her everyday life. This man, this lodger, moves in, and he completely falls in love with her in sort of a romantic love. And it's because it's told through his eyes, it's seen as a love affair between an adult man and a young girl. That's not how Lolita would see it. I would very much like to see a book written from her perspective, but the disturbing tiny little flickers you see throughout the novel show you enough to make you sort of pull away from the book. I did find it slightly odd how segmented part 1 and part 2 are. So there, as I say, there are sort of 2 sections, and essentially one is leading up to an event and one is following an event. But it seems odd how sort of the writing style and the attitudes change so dramatically from that one event. That's one thing that did sort of confuse me a bit, and it might be that if I do reread it, then I will understand a little bit more about why. It's one of those books that I am glad I have read, and I'm very glad that I've read a Russian author, because it is my first Russian author. But I didn't like it. I like the book, I didn't like the content. It's a very difficult one. If you've read it, I suspect you know exactly what I'm talking about. I did give this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next one I actually listened to on audiobook, and that was We Are Liars by E. Lockheart. So this is a book that a lot of people will know on BookTube. I know it's very popular on BookTube, and I saw it on the sort of app thing, Audible, and was like, yes, lots of people seem to like this. It was fine. I was not in any way blown away by the twist at the end, like everybody seems to be. They're like, oh, my entire world has been shattered by the ending. I wasn't. I thought it was lazy, and I didn't really like the book that much, so I give it 2 out of 5 stars. And then the next one I read was The Children's Act by Ian McEwan. This is my first Ian McEwan, and if this is what Ian McEwan is like, then I will very much be diving into all of the rest of his novels. I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was really unique and really interesting to read about. The premise of the book is that you have a high court judge who is going through her personal life and sort of issues in it, so she's going through things on her own, and she judges family law. So she's looking at cases where most often you have an individual who is being placed away from their family or placed with a particular family member. It's very highly fraught, basically, these cases that she's judging. And this particular case is about a young boy who lives in a very religious family, and the decision has been made by him or by his parents or by the community that he will not be receiving a blood transfusion. And the doctors are advising that if he does not have a blood transfusion, he will die. So we really follow this judge as she's grappling with her own sort of emotions and her own feelings and trying to make an objective judgment on someone else's life. I thought it was really interesting to see lawyers from this perspective, and it's something I haven't seen before. So normally when I read about lawyers, it tends to be in a thriller sense. It tends to be that they are, you know, potentially either completely and utterly corrupt or they're battling against evil. This was just an individual who was making some really difficult decisions, and I really appreciated that. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. And then the last 3 I have are 3 of the Penguin Little Black classics. So the first one was Antigone by Sophocles. This is my first voluntary classical text, and I really enjoyed it. It reminded me an awful lot of Hamlet, although it should be that Hamlet reminded me of this, but I read Hamlet first, so that's the way it works in my mind. It's essentially about the relationship between a father and a daughter, and sort of the drama that happens when you have a pull from one side in terms of a family and a pull from the other side. So the situation you have is essentially 2 brothers have died in war, one of whom has been sort of hailed as a hero of war, and one is counted as a prisoner of war. But to the woman, the daughter of this man that we're talking about, they're still both her brothers, and it's about her not agreeing with the laws that society and her father and her uncle have put into place, and saying, do you know what, I'm going to go against it. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. And the next one I picked up was Socrates' Defence by Plato. Similarly, I'd never read any non-fiction in the classical sense, apart from what I'd read in classics in school. So I thought that seeing as I enjoyed that play, that I would go to the other side of it, and I was expecting this to be so much more difficult to read than it was. It read so easily, and it was so relatable to the language we use today. I don't know if it's a brilliant translation or if it's a very accessible writing style by Plato. I give this one 5 out of 5 stars, and I'd be really interested in picking up more classical non-fiction. It's something I had no interest in before, but this little book is convincing me. So the very last book that I read in the month of August was The Night is Darkening Around Me by Emily Bronte. So I've heard a lot of people say that when you read Emily Bronte, you miss out if you miss her poetry. So I thought, you know what, when I saw this one with the others, that I will have a go. I don't want to miss out on something that could be so wonderful. I think these poems are incredibly sad and incredibly depressing, and I think that she really does have a skill at expressing through poetry those feelings of grief and horror almost at losing a loved one. I didn't like this one as much as I liked the other 2, but I did enjoy it, and I did think it was good poetry. I think what I enjoyed really was the skill rather than the poems themselves. I'm quite particular when it comes to poetry, and I quite like dense imagery in my poetry and extended metaphor, and whilst there was elements of extended metaphor in some of these poems, it didn't capture the love that I do have for that extended metaphor in general in poetry. I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. So these are the last of the books that I read in the month of August. Really love to know what you read this month. It's been a really varied reading month for me. I've had some rubbish and I've had some good stuff. So let me know what you've read, let me know what you've enjoyed, and as I'll explain in my next video, I'm quite open to being recommended books at the moment, so if you have any really good recommendations from anything I've said in my videos, now is the time. Thank you all ever so much for watching, and I will see you soon in my next video. Bye bye!